and the ache that we feel in the mixed message of love, like when we are harmed or when we are not attuned to or cared for in a way that promotes our well-being, our nurturing, of necessity, just to survive, we minimize our wants, our longings, our desires. We minimize our needs. Welcome to Grief Heals, the podcast that explores how grief heals. Join us as we consider how grief invites love within ourselves, our communities, our world, our histories, and how it is that grief heals. I'm Lisa Michelle Zega here with Eric Simpson. You know, it's crazy to me, Eric, because I have been friends with you now for 35 years. And I still get as tripped up as I did as an 18-year-old in the cafeteria at Calvary Chapel Bible College, sometimes with your humor. Like, it'll take me a minute. And I'm all, oh, okay. Sometimes I feel like your humor takes me off my feet and I'm right there on my butt trying to catch up.
You know, what's cool though is about 35 years. We've been doing this podcast for 34 years. And all that content out there, and we only have 5 listeners. And we were doing it before there was an internet. People were like, "What are you doing?" And we're like, "You'll see, this is the future." We were just recording stuff.
You know, it's so fascinating because what one of the things that I took away from Bell Hook's book is the idea that by having an unclear definition of love, we are prone and primed to think of unloving things as loving. And so it can create this confusion around love because it's like, yeah, well, love just means I've got an affinity for you, a strong affection. I care for you. I bring you some pleasure. She talks about this time of interviewing a bunch of kids from all different backgrounds and the similarities around, well, you know, love is when mommy makes me happy. Love is when mommy buys me a toy. Okay, my brain is all over the place, but I had this experience when let's see, what had I moved out yet? I think I had moved out and I went to a meeting where they were talking a lot about demons and casting out demons and this sort of thing. And I had a friend, actually, you know her, but anyway, she was bringing me into these different settings. And the main guy walked up to me, asked if I was willing to stand up, and I did. And he put his hands over my head, Eric, and he said, "Your wires have been crossed." So he crisscrossed his hands over my head, then he uncrossed them and, you know, said some incantation like, "In the name of Jesus, I uncross your wires," right? And I had an acute sense of what he was talking about. And I felt some measure of freedom right then and there. I went to lunch with the lady that invited me and two of our friends, and they asked if I knew what it was. And I said, yes. I said, yes, I was taught that the words "I love you" could be attached, that wire was crossed and it was attached to unloving actions. And unloving actions were attached to love. And now the sentiment of love and the actions of love, I'm to see as connected, and the connection between things that are harmful and the lack of love, those are the wires. And I just knew it. I like, I hadn't read the book, I hadn't whatever, and maybe it was because the therapist I was telling you about, you know, that because I had been meeting with that therapist. So I'm sure that laid that foundation. But yeah, that's just fascinating to me to remember that.
Reminds me, for some reason, it reminds me of what I used to do to my children whenever they were upset. if they were crying or like throwing a little tantrum, that type of upset. I got this from the movie about Andy Kaufman when he has cancer and he's going and seeing shamans and things like this. And he watches a shaman claim to take the cancer, the disease out of someone's body, but he's actually holding the thing in his hand already. And he reaches a fist to the person's flesh and pulls out and then shows the squishy stuff in his hand. Well, whenever my kids started getting a, having a tantrum or whatever, I would say, "Oh, you're feeling something right inside your body. Is it like right here? Is it right here in your chest area?" And they just look at me and I'd put my hand up and like I'm grabbing something out of their chest and I start pulling it out and going, "Ooh, that's sticky," and throwing it away and go, "Oh man, that's so sticky. Let's get all of that out of there." And they would just totally stop crying or what. I mean, I think I just confused them so much that they were stunned.
So one of the things I think I'll start then with the premise, right? She makes a the assertion that hey, because we've got such loosey goosey definitions about love and tend to make it more like a noun, something that just is. There's no handles on it. There's no assessment of it, and so she borrows from Scott Peck, right? And chooses to use the definition that love is the will to exert oneself for one's own or another's spiritual growth. Yeah, and by keeping it in the realm more of an action and an act of the will and choice. And then she also parses out where she's like, look, we are taught, just like John Bradshaw, we're just taught that love just happens. It happens with your family of origin. We're just loving. And that every child is going to learn love in their primary home environment. And we know that's not true, and how much confusion that creates around love, that we think that, okay, well, if there's affection, if there's care, if there is pleasure, then this is an environment of love. We can end up even accepting harm or abuse and still saying, I know they love me.
Right.
And so I thought that was a powerful distinction.
It's like love. Love is when it's not defined, it's slippery, and you can think, well, they love me, even though they're doing these things to me that are oppressing me and are abusive. I will accept these things because I know that deep down they really love me. Or sometimes it's even they're doing this because they love me. They're hitting me because their feelings are so strong. Um,
Or I did so bad.
yeah,
They've got to beat it out of me.
right, right. Both of those
Or I
things.
am so bad, they
It could
have
be
to
that
beat it out
it
of
could be
me.
that the abuser tells himself that because abuser thinks that they love the person as well. Tells
Oh,
themselves,
absolutely.
I love you, so much that my feelings are so strong that couldn't help but act in violence. Look what you made me do. That type of language
Well,
that you hear from abusers.
she even talks about the idea that, look, not everyone that's been abused abuses,
Right.
and those that of the numbers of people that are abusing others, I don't remember what percentage she gave, it was in the high 90s, have themselves been abused.
Hmm.
And she really does a great job. I don't remember her talking about this specifically, but she doesn't use the language of blame.
And so
And
that's when yeah, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. When you were talking about the mystification of love and how that feeds into a capitalist society and how that feeds into the system that wants us consuming, right? So you were saying some things about that, and I think you'll speak better to it than I will.
Well, as long as love is not defined, not only can it, help to uphold oppressive systems or cultures, or so that dominant cultures are able to dominate. And those cultures could be gender, where the dominant person is the male, or it can be race, where the dominant person is the white person. I think she talks about the nuclear family and how that is not really an ideal. The culture of the nuclear family, where the parents are able to sort of they have carte blanche to do whatever they want to their kids, more or
Without
less.
challenge. Yeah.
Right, right. Not only do we have that, but we have all of us who do not know how to define love. We might seek to find love through products that make promises for love. And what they're really offering is maybe temporary pleasure or status or attention or any other number of things. So they can commodify a not very clearly defined notion of love so that we use our buying power to help promote the economy and make rich people richer in the name of love. And so it's in the interest of our economy itself not to have a clear definition of some of these things that come naturally to us and to make us think that we can only get them outside of ourselves, that we don't already possess the capacity to love or that we're not already worthy of being loved. And so we have to go and, buy something or attain some status in order to be even worthy of being loved because we don't understand what love is.
One of the things that comes up for me when you say that is we're not understanding that we're worthy of love. And the ache that we feel in the mixed message of love, like when we are harmed or when we are not attuned to or cared for in a way that promotes our well being, our nurturing, of necessity, just to survive, we minimize our wants, our longings, our desires. We minimize our needs. And it really helped me to recognize, oh, the reason that we live, I mean, one of the reasons our culture is grief phobic, one of the reasons our culture minimizes our losses, like it goes hand in glove. If we're minimizing what it is to be loved, then of course we must minimize what it means to experience loss, right? Because otherwise, our losses will shed light on the lovelessness that we're experiencing. It really helped me to see the interplay of these two ideas in our culture. Love and grief are part of the human experience. And I keep coming back to how these things minimize our humanity. The way that love is portrayed and how it's mystified, it's not clear, it's you can't nail it down. And so much is done in the name of love.
Mm-hmm. It's funny to me on that point is that I think she quotes Diane Ackerman in a book that she writes where she talks about how love is hard to define and then never defines it in the entire book. And I think that's a pretty popular notion. And even I think some it's possible someone might get a little queasy about the idea that we're going to define love. I know that as a Christian in the past, I always had more of a definition of love just based upon some of the theological aspects of Christianity. And I'd always thought that love is a choice, for instance. And so I sought to define love for those reasons. And I think there can be an overly intellectualizing of something that isn't a property of the intellect. Like love isn't something that we can reason out necessarily. I think M. Scott Peck talked, and she quotes M. Scott Peck as talking about love extending yourself for the spiritual growth
Growth,
of
the nurturing of your own or another's spiritual growth.
right, right. I mean, there's all sorts of ramifications of that. Anyway, I think that M. Scott Peck's definition works in at least parsing through what is nonsense or what is not love and what people mistake for love and what can stand in resistance against the oppressive cultures in which we live in our 21st century United States, where we are, and all over the world, I guess. The oppression differs depending on where you go.
You know, it's so easy to read a book like this or let me just say what happens for me reading a book like this. The first place my mind goes is myself as a child. What am I absorbing around love? Like what am I absorbing? What am I believing about love? What am I accepting for love and those sorts of things? Somehow when you were just speaking, what started coming up for me was me as an agent of love and assessing my relationships and the people that I've been attached to and have proclaimed I love you. And my husband of 23 years came to mind. I'm not currently married, so that could be not currently married to him. So my first husband of 23 years. Eric, I had affection. I was invested. I cared deeply. There were ways that I really genuinely extended myself for his well-being or the nurturing of his spiritual growth. And simultaneously, I did the opposite. Many of my actions were the opposite of love and were even abusive. The same can be said about my actions toward myself, having had a faulty definition of love, having minimized my own experience of loss, my own suffering. I didn't know how to tend to myself or be with my own broken heart. And I didn't have the capacity to be with his broken heart. So I minimized myself, I minimized him. I tried to fix us both. I also experienced what I would call today a great deal of abuse. Like it was like the perfect storm. And it also just points out to me that my children were not nurtured in a loving home. And to say that more directly is painful. My kids, if they were assessing our home life, they could actually say, in truth, my mom, by this definition, my mom did not love me. My mom had strong affection for me. My mom, gave me good times. There were pleasurable times in my childhood. There are ways that she exerted herself for my well-being. And because I am the adult in that situation who is telling them again and again and again how much I love them, they grew up with very confused notions of love. And I am not blaming myself, Eric, because like you said, I grew up in a system that was giving me a lot of misinformation about love. And then I perpetuated it like naturally. And I think by raising our understanding and expectation of love, the beauty, the demand of love, the verb of love, we simultaneously expand our definition of grief. And, I'll just say the reason that I care about this podcast or any of the work that I do around grief in the world is because for me, it connects me to my humanity. I can talk about the woman who didn't love her children, that woman being me, and I can have as much compassion for myself as I do for my children. And then also extending out to our communities, to our world. Like, this isn't about bashing people. It's like we get to suffer together. I'm feeling the weight of just letting it be personal, letting this be my story and not the story of my upbringing.
I think that love relates to grief as we've been talking about this in ways that, you've obviously brought forward because if we become aware of what love, the potential for love and of the things that masquerade as love but are not really loving, then shows us an open wound for which we can grieve. And that wound is the lack of love or the lack of authentic love in our lives and in our histories.
It becomes the impetus to enter our own suffering and the suffering of others with love. I'm amazed that my capacity to give and receive love has grown exponentially by entering grief. It's like this wild, mystical, and yet so deeply practical. I mean, it's just changing who and how I am in the world. It's a message of hope to enter grief, to enter love.
You've been listening to Grief Heals with Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. Music by Ken Dalian, Drunken Nights to Sunday Mornings, and Stefan Carlin, A Calming Ocean, A Common Notion. If you would like more information about the work Lisa does, point your browsers to legityou.com. That's LEGITYOU. Lisa can also be reached at lisamichelle@legityou.com. This has been a Jump Up and Down production.